Pull up my questions for you guys. Katie, did you feel like, I know Kate and you were talking a bit about the insurance contract stuff. Do you feel like you understand what needs to happen, even though it kind of sucks?
Yeah, I know what needs to happen. Can you hear me now?
It was me. I had you on mute again.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know what needs to happen now. It's just
I know it sucks.
taking the time to actually call and figure out who I'm in now, because I know when I've signed on with my jobs, I worked for small clinics, so some of it, I think I was credentialed through them, so I think it might be a group contract, but some of them, I'm pretty sure are probably individual contracts. So I gotta get all that figured out.
That's why so many people, when they're starting, do the sniff route.
Yeah,
Little, right? But I know it's killing you. You don't like it.
yeah. Yeah, no, I don't really care for the home health, and it's just hard because I still do like the pelvic floor
Right.
and a contract basis at my previous employer. And so if I start exiting out of these contracts, then eventually I have to explain to her why I'm not able to see those patients anymore. So, I mean, I don't have a non-compete or anything like that, but it's still kind of a.
Well, right. It's an
issue,
awkward
yeah.
proposition. Yeah.
Yep.
We'll give it another minute here. If you feel like it, Katie, you can kind of explain to these guys what we're talking about, but what your situation is.
Yeah, sure. So I emailed Sarah and Kate last week after our group meeting. My question kind of regarding what their thoughts were and steps I'm taking moving forward. I currently work in home health, but I do PR and pelvic floor at my previous employer where I worked in outpatient physical therapy. And now knowing that if you accept cash from a patient who has an insurance that you actually may be credentialed from a previous job, it's technically illegal. And I worked for mostly small clinics since I got out of school, so there's a good chance that I have individual contracts with the insurance companies. So trying to figure out how to navigate between starting up my hybrid model likely and figuring out what insurance I am actually credentialed with as an individual and what our group from my previous employers, but also because I do see pelvic floor PRN at my previous employer, still trying to figure out like how I can continue to do that while I'm building my practice, but also not being illegal and accepting cash patients when I'm credentialed with an insurance company, and how to go about, do I have that discussion with my previous employer who I'm doing contract work for, or what? So as of right now, I'm just trying to figure out what insurances I'm contracted with as an individual and what was group paid for, and then also trying to figure out what insurance they do want to accept in my hybrid model. I have a good idea, but I'm starting to reach out to local billers that I know of in the area or in the state to see who are the best paying insurances. Those are the ones I want to accept. I don't want to accept the ones where I'm not going to get reimbursed that much. So it's just a lot of figuring out all the logistic legal mumbo jumbo that makes my head hurt.
Yes. It is annoying too, because there's really, it's just legwork. You just have to sit
Like,
down.
there's nothing I can do, is just sit down and start making phone calls.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. As always, before we kind of dive in, any burning questions that we need to put on our list, I sent out an email earlier with some things we're going to touch on, but anything that came up in the material or the homework? Okay. So Kate, do you want to, maybe we start talking about pricing first? Because that came up quite a bit.
Yeah, so let's start with pricing. I mean, overall, like I think part of it is like, okay, setting your rate for a PT visit and an eval. And then there are a bunch of questions within that, right? Like, is your first visit more expensive than your follow-up visits? How much do you charge for a package? Like, so there are all those basic questions, right? About like, how are you actually determining that rate? And then what I was also seeing in the homework is that a lot of people are going to be offering a lot of different services where it's like training or Mary Kay, I think you had like arm care for overhead athletes. And these things are all at different prices. So like a PT visit is one thing, a training visit is something else, arm care would be something else. So I guess I wanted to start out hearing from really everyone, like whether you have the same price for everything or different prices, like what is your reasoning behind making those prices different or making those prices the same? So Mary Kay, I'll start with you just because I remember this from your homework. So can you just give a little background about where you came up with your prices, like what you looked at to decide on those numbers, and then maybe the difference between your like arm care program and your regular PT?
Yeah, so I want to work with overhead athletes. So my big thing is trying to like get into the softball community, just as like a little background for everybody. So what I had written was the eval, just like a PT eval is 150, a visit is 120, and then an arm care eval is 125, and then like follow-up visits, depending on how much time spent, as 50 to 100. And I guess kind of where I was getting stuck is a lot of the people that I see doing like arm care stuff aren't necessarily like in the PT world. They're more like a sports coach. And a lot of their prices were on like the lower end, like $50 to $60. So I was kind of getting stuck with, do I go that high as like what my PT visit would be? Or do I kind of like go with what more of the like local competitors have? So I think that's where I was getting stuck, like pricing it. But there weren't a lot of people that posted prices for like their arm care stuff either. Everything was like, oh, email us for prices or things like that.
Yeah, so Mary Kate, can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by arm care and like what
Yeah.
other trainers are advertising that as?
Yep. So, like what in general, an arm care program is looking essentially at like their throwing mechanics, checking rotator cuff strength, parascapular strength, and just kind of identifying what needs to be worked on, whether it's flexibility, strength, even looking at like lower extremities, since a lot of power in throwing is generated from the legs and kind of transferred up through the chain. So in general, like that's kind of what they're looking at.
Cool. So your issue is kind of like other people are offering that service or something similar to that service who do not have a PT credential, basically, right? So like
Yep.
they're offering it for a lower price. Before we kind of offer our input on that, anybody else have ideas about that or like going through a similar issue? Anyone who's also doing like training or just regular like personal training visits and wondering about pricing for those?
Yeah, I actually kind of had a question on that because I kind of see it as like for having this, maybe having the same price for PT services. So even for initial eval and follow-ups, because I sort of see the point of just you're providing the same level of care at each one of those visits and just simplifying it with having a base price. But Yeah, the question I guess would be if you were doing programming or personal training, since you may be not providing that like level of, I guess, like medical assessment with it, that maybe people wouldn't want to pay the same price for it. So I guess kind of justifying like, can you still charge the same price or should that be at a lesser price?
Yeah, it's a good question. Lauren, did you have something to say on that?
Yeah, so I've done video gait analysis in the past, and that's often advertised at the running stores nearby. So it's a different thing. When I hear somebody else is charging $60, I don't want to charge, in my mind, I wouldn't want to charge $60. I wouldn't want to charge the same because I value my degree more. So I feel like if you can go to the store and get the VGA real quick or the arm care stuff, or you can come to the expert with the doctor of physical therapy and we can break this down. So I want to add, in my mind, I'd want to like have it almost more expensive, have it almost the same as my eval. That's what I would do. I just think about, so I work for a huge corporate thing and they charge for video gait analysis, it's $150. And that's the same as the out-of-pocket evaluation for a patient. And I think that's right because it is an evaluation, it's an assessment, it's a specialty. And I think that I have to value what I do and that I went and got that education to do it and who I am. But that's the way that I would look at it.
Yeah, is anyone else doing maybe not even a specialty, but personal training as part of their PT business? I know there are a couple, maybe not on the call tonight.
I think we talked about considering that as sort of like an aspect of that, just to potentially have a little bit more like to offer people to get things kind of up and running. But yeah, I'm not really sure what that would look like compared to the PT business, because a good point that Lauren made, it's not like if I were to see somebody for personal training, I wouldn't just skip over the assessment and anything like that. Like I still would probably take them through a fairly thorough assessment just to make sure they're prepared for whatever we're going to be doing.
Right. And I think too, like at a very basic level, like regardless of what you're doing, you could also make the argument that your time is worth a certain amount of money, right? So like you have your degree and an hour of your time is worth $150. And I think where you can kind of get into trouble, like Mary Kate, if you are saying like the demographic you really want to see is overhead athletes, like you want an incentive to like see as many of those patients as you can get, right? So like if that's your lower priced thing, like if I'm offering some like lower price service, like I'm not gonna want to really see that, right? Like I want to see the thing that's like always $150 as a clinician. So I think what worries me about that is like, this is your specialty. Like this is the thing that you really want to treat. And then you're valuing it less than like your average PT visit. Whereas like I would kind of look at that as the opposite. Like you could even make that more if you wanted to. Like I can do a regular PT visit or I can see you like in this niche that I'm really good at, and that like specific throwing analysis, like a one-time evaluation is like $200. Like I'm not saying you have to do that, but I think like Lauren said, like you want to set yourself apart from all these people who don't have your experience and your degree. But I think it's easy to like see those other prices and feel like you have to like compete with them, right? But even like video gait, like people do that for free, right? Like there are running stores, like they want to sell you a shoe and they put you on a treadmill and they're like, we're gonna put all this fancy equipment on you for free and then like sell you a running shoe, right? It's like I think there are some of these things where like if you really wanted to compete, like there are people doing it for free too.
Yeah, I didn't even think of it like the way that you put it or Lauren put it. So I think I was just so focused on like, I don't want to be like double the price of the person that's like 5 minutes down the road, but I totally get what you guys are saying. So something to look at, definitely.
Yeah.
Can I chime in here really quick?
Mhm.
So I like what Kate said about even charging more for this, which is like a little bit of a paradigm shift, right? But so I do a lot of virtuals with hip impingement, and I charge more because, and I call them these are like movement coaching, I call them, because it could be out of state, but it's people looking for something really specific that they cannot find. And then sometimes it's a bit more work for me, because sometimes they are a return patient that I see, for a couple weeks in a row or once a month for a while. But often it's like 1 or 2 visits, and then they just freaking email me for the rest of their lives, right? And so it's like a little bit more work in a sense, because I'm gonna like send them all of this material and send them their homework. And at the same time, I don't necessarily need to do like a huge eval write up for myself, because they're not going to come in and I didn't put my hands on them, and I'm not billing them for PT, but they're being charged $200. So I think it's like sometimes when you set yourself apart in that category, people will even view you further as the expert, right? And then over time, you do become the expert because you're the one treating all these people. But I do agree that it's probably worth more than your average PT client session, because that is your expertise. Like if I knew how to throw a ball or wanted to learn, I would go to you.
I think
It's amazing. Oh, sorry, go ahead. It's amazing. Like I thought of this the other day. My husband and I had a plumber come out for like literally 20 minutes, and he charged $150. And I didn't even bat an eye. I was like, okay, yeah, that's what it costs. But like when it comes to physical therapy, and like here we are with advanced degrees, we have such a hard time charging that amount of money. And I had to think to myself, like, why is that? And I still don't quite know the answer, but I think it has something to do with insurance, because like the history of it is that someone else was paying this. So we feel bad asking patients to pay for it.
And we just want to help people. So we
Yeah.
help people for free all the
And
time
guilt.
anyway. Right. And it feels very privileged to be like, now you're going to pay me money for this service that I should be giving to everyone, but not everyone can afford my services. So there's that element too of feeling like it's an equity issue. That's okay to feel that. And you don't have to serve everybody. And you have served a lot of different populations for a long time.
But I think it's also like it's two different things. Like people are used to their insurance covering it, you're used to their insurance covering it, and you're not used to having to talk about money, right? So like even if you were at a bigger clinic and your patient might have been paying $150 a session the whole time, you don't know sometimes. Like you're not thinking about that number. Like you just see that patient come in and you know their diagnosis and you're gonna treat them. But you're not necessarily like talking to the front office people like about the cost of the session, because that just wouldn't, unless the patient was like complaining to you for some reason, normally that's not even gonna come back to you. So I think part of it is just like we leave money out of the equation as PTs. Like you were never really taught to think about it. Like we don't really think of it in like this fee for service model, really. Like in PT school, I can't remember anything about money, right? Like maybe a little bit. Did we even learn about coding in PT school? I don't even know if the insurance side was there. I feel like we just talked about how to treat. I don't think there's anything business related.
Well, and we forget what our patients do or don't know as well. So I just hired a new PT. She's coming from an insurance-based clinic, and her current employer, well, she found this out because a patient is asking her what the reimbursement might be if she comes to see her now at Arrow and she submits for reimbursement, like what's she looking at? Because she's used to paying a certain copay. And so they looked into it, they called Premera, and it turns out that Premera will reimburse about $80 per the codes that we normally bill, which is pretty good. If I charge $160, that's half back, right? So, but the patient writes back, and my employee just texted me this just like 5 minutes ago, and she said that the patient is worried because she can't afford $200 a session. And so we kind of like dug into it, and their billing, like an average PT session, is $280. And that's what the patient is seeing on her EOB. And so she's like, shit, I can't afford $200 a session and that's like with reimbursement, right? And that makes sense, but it's like, we forget actually that the patients can see what those bills look like, right? And most clinics are billing a lot higher than what they're getting reimbursed, of course, but also way higher than what we're charging. So it is just kind of a paradigm shift for us to start thinking about it even.
So that reminds me, actually, I was always under the impression that I work for a hospital. So the hospital is kind of billing more per CPT code, knowing that the reimbursement is going to be less. So if you're doing a hybrid model, are we changing, like, are we billing a little bit more for the insurance-based contracts that we have as opposed to cash? Like, is that even legal? Like, or do you just flat out bill the same thing for every visit?
So, like you said, the system is really messed up and it's completely arbitrary. Like you can get away with billing different prices by having like a cash rate same day thing. But normally, like when you're billing insurance, you just want to make sure that you're like billing something that is higher than what they're going to reimburse, because you don't want to like undercut yourself, right? Like knowing that Blue Cross is going to reimburse like $32 a unit or whatever it is, I wouldn't charge them 30 because like then I'm not actually making as much as I could. But they're not transparent with what they're going to reimburse you. So you kind of have to overestimate a little bit. So that's why those charges look so ridiculous. Like nobody ever bills $280 thinking that that's what they're gonna get. Like you don't think like this PT session is worth $280, but like that's just what people send out because they're like, well, I know they're gonna reimburse less than this. So like it doesn't even matter what I put down on paper, which is like really sad. Because like we could just bill $1,000 for a session and it like Blue Cross would pay 140. So like you don't want to be ridiculous about it. Like you want it to be relatively similar, but it's tricky because they're not transparent with what they're actually going to reimburse. So sometimes you have to like guess what that rate is going to be, if that makes sense. Like it's tricky.
So then how do we pick and choose what contracts we want to have if they're not transparent?
Yeah, and that's where it gets tough. So that's where you have to do a lot of this research, basically, like talking to friends who own in-network clinics to see what their reimbursement rate is like. Even like if you or a family member or a friend is going to PT and using their insurance, they get that EOB so they can see what actual reimbursement looks like, not what the company charged, but what the insurance company actually is reimbursing for that. So like you can start to ask around a little bit. There's a chance if you got an insurance company on the phone for long enough, once you'd already started that process, they might be transparent. I never experienced that. But you just have to kind of start asking around, unfortunately. Okay, anything else on pricing? How to set your prices, price differences, anything like that?
What about like length of appointment? Should we get into that?
Mm-hmm. Is anyone planning on charging a different rate for a different appointment time? Like a 30-minute visit is some amount of money, 45 minutes, 60 minutes. Where is it one flat fee? And you can just put it in the chat if you want to.
I have seen a couple of people in my area doing sessions where it's like just dry needling or just manual work. And I do think that they charge less for that. Do you, either of you do anything like that?
Yeah, we have cupping only sessions that are half hour and they're half the price essentially. But we require you to be an active patient. Like, kind of that's like good practice, right? Like, I shouldn't just be treating somebody that I haven't evaled. But that way it kind of helps too, that they're not just coming in for that. And Kate, you guys do dry needling, right?
Yeah, we do the same thing for dry needling. So we offer dry needling only, and it's a reduced cost because it's only like 30 minutes. But they have to have a full evaluation before they do that.
So nobody's gonna offer 30-minute appointments at half your price.
We see a lot of people right now in our current practice for like they just want to come in for dry needling. So that would be something, we both do it. So it would be something that would be a good one, like what you guys do. Like they have to be a current patient or like already had an eval or whatever. But I feel like that would be an easy thing for us to add.
My only question with that though is, like, if you just started adding or offering just your normal like return visits for a half an hour for half price, do you think some people are going to go that route where they're like, this is cheaper, this is only 30 minutes, like let's go with that, and you might not really have the time that you want to spend with them? Do you find that people go down that route? That would be my only concern with that.
And we try to steer you away from doing that. But it does happen a lot. Like people will do like half hour or 45 or whatever. And it can lend toward people choosing that.
Yeah,
And
and I
then you
think
don't get as much done, and then they're not paying as much. And
Right.
right, and then you end up doing basically the same amount of work too,
Yeah.
right? Like you're still doing the assessment, you're still giving them all the exercises. Like it might be a little shorter, but you are still doing that work for them, right? And then now you're charging like half price. So that's why we don't encourage people to do that, because I feel like you kind of fall into that trap. Dry needling's a little bit different, but the one thing you do have to watch out for is that you don't turn those visits into like 45-minute, 60-minute dry needling sessions, and then you're only charging them half price.
right. Because when you do the metrics, right, and sometimes this doesn't come out until like a couple of months in, you're like, I'm seeing this many patients a week on average, right? But if you're charging a half visit for that's like essentially a half patient visit, right? And then you're not actually meeting all your goals financially. Problematic.
And maybe this is a good time to bring this up too, on the issue of pricing. Is anybody planning on offering a free screen or like a free first visit, discovery visit, whatever you're gonna call it? Is anyone planning on doing something like that?
We had talked about that, and I feel like in my experience, I really don't like those at all, because I find that I give them like a big chunk of value within 20 or 30 minutes, like doing a lot of the assessment, doing a lot of like, here's what I think is going on. And then they're like, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to run with that for a while. And then you get nothing from
Yeah,
it.
they never come back.
So I feel like if I'm going to be doing any sort of evaluation, like if you're going to come in, I don't know. I think maybe like if they're going to do like, hey, can you, like if someone wants to see like a squat screen or something like that, maybe. But I think it just gets really like, I don't know. It's really iffy on if you give away that bit for free, then I think they'll just run with it, and they typically don't end up coming back.
Anyone else on that?
Yeah, same. I used to do screens for my current company, and exactly the same thing. Like you'd run through like a real quick eval essentially, and then I can count on one hand the number of patients it actually turned into. I was planning on going the route of like doing mobility classes, or even like, a couple week-long workshops or something like that. And then a lot of times in my experience, people will come up to me and say, hey, I've got a shoulder thing. What can I do about that? And then I could like, turn that into a patient, as opposed to offering a free screen.
Right, but it's so tempting for people, for PTs, right? Again, to like
Mhm.
offer like, oh, let me just check this and let me just treat you for free, right? Let me show you how good I am and not charge you for it. And then hopefully you'll come back and pay me if I charge you.
I initially thought that was a great idea. Like our employer always encourages us to do like, let's do free running screens, things like that. But if you spend enough hours outside of work doing those and don't see very much return, you'll quickly turn into opposing those.
Right, right. And we see that across the board. So I have not talked to a client yet that's like, oh, free screens are like my bread and butter for getting people in. Definitely not the case. So that can go for like workshops too. Like you're doing workshops to get yourself out there. You may not get people immediately in to your clinic to do evals. We'll talk about that later, but okay,
Everybody seems to be on the same.
they
page.
do.
Sometimes we have like long debates on that.
Yeah.
We are not a fan of the first screen.
Yeah, I feel like we do have long debates about that sometimes.
I've seen other ideas of like doing like I've heard people call them like 20 for 20, where you like have like a 20-minute screen, you charge them like $20. So there's a little bit of a buy-in, but I
Can
still
you imagine doing that for 20 minutes?
I can't
No.
imagine doing that. And I don't know. There was one clinic I
Why do
worked
I want
with.
$20? Like, what is that doing for me? Nothing.
No,
It's not
And there was-
helping the business.
No.
we got feedback from one of the clinics that we were travelers with. We did sort of a free screen, and one of the patients, because I think we did like a $30 or $35 screen, something low cost, and the patient actually like thought that we were like significantly undervaluing ourselves. So like hearing them saying that, like I think they almost said like they thought it like looked a little bit desperate. So I was like, well, that's a good point.
Well, and then like think about the barrier too of like like you said, like you've already gotten this service for free, and now you're gonna ask them to pay $150, $160. Like that's such a big jump. And they're like, well, you already gave me all of this. I think I'll just take this and work on it. I don't know. Like I'm so anti-free screen at this point. Like I'm currently going through these hoops of like trying to take cello lessons, like for myself, private lessons. And like they're offering me this free, like I got on the phone with this woman and she's like, I'm gonna talk to you on the phone. And then you have to talk to somebody else on the phone. And she's like, and now I can offer you a free trial lesson. And I'm like, I just want to come in. Like, let me pay you money to take this lesson. Like, I don't need to do all these other things. But I feel like people feel like they need to do it as part of this like sales script or like a sales tactic. Like if I can talk to you for free, I can convince you to come in. But that, to me, it just seems really stressful too. Like if that's what I'm using is like, I'm gonna get you in here for 20 minutes for free and this is my time to like convince you that I know what I'm talking about. I don't know.
I totally agree. And also think about like, I'll use like an example of like going to get your hair done or something. If you see the list of people that are available and they all have different prices, most people on this call are not going to be like, I want the cheapest one, right? Because you're going to be like, maybe that person is just brand new. I can't quite afford this master hairstylist, but I'm going to pick something in the middle, right? But like rarely are we looking for the cheapest option, especially if somebody's like really, you know, like a CrossFitter coming in with really specific pain with muscle ups and they need an expert, right? They don't want a free screen. They want you to help them. I like that term of like, it does feel a little desperate. Okay, cool. We will probably keep coming back to that because that is a topic that it's so tempting to do it. And especially when you're like, I don't have any patients, like, how do I get, so networking is a different topic than free screens, or that's like a different tactic. Okay, cool. What was our next thing on this list here? You guys are good on that topic? I think so. Okay, there was lots, there's lots of stuff around direct access. So did anybody on this call have a specific question about direct access? We can pull up all of them up, but there were quite a few. So off the top of my head, one was in regard to if you have direct access in your state, but you're treating someone in another state, like via telehealth, but first of all, that's a licensing issue, but do they need direct access too? Right, and so the short answer is you need a license to treat people in their state, wherever that is, and you need to know the laws for that state and follow them.
I think the question was, it's like very specific, but it's like if you're licensed in 2 states, and like let's say I'm in Illinois and I'm treating somebody in Florida and I'm licensed in both states, and I'm physically in Illinois, but my patient is in Florida and I'm licensed in both, then like which direct access law applies?
right.
And I would assume it would be where the patient is. Like I'm licensed in that state and that's where I'm treating the patient technically. So I would think that that's the one that you go with, like the patient, not where I physically am, right?
I think you're right.
So,
Because if that was in person, that's where you would be treating them.
right. And that's like where a patient would be like submitting any,
There's
like, it's like a very, I don't know, it's a specific question, but I would think that it would be that state the patient is actually in.
Mhm.
Any other direct access issues? I know we have a few states in here that are not fully direct access.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm in New Jersey and our direct access law is they can come in without a referral for either 12 visits or 30 days, and then whatever comes first is kind of when they need to go back to a referral. Like, are you sending like a plan of care to their primary doc, or how are you kind of getting the referral to have them keep continuing PT?
So we are similar in Illinois, and we just make sure we get doctor's information on every patient that comes in. So even if they don't have a script, I'm always like, give me some physician's information. Like even if it's your like OBGYN, whoever it is, like I need it on this intake form. And then after the eval, we just always send it and then get that signed off. So then you've covered your bases. But that is where like having a faxing system in play comes in, right? Like, so that's why we use WebPT, just because it's easy to fax it directly, but some kind of online fax server is useful if you don't have full direct access. But that's what we do. Like we just collect it on everyone and then send it in so we're covered.
And Kate, like, let's say that I gave you my information for my OBGYN. Does that person typically sign off on it? Or do you ever get pushback that when they're like, I never saw this person for their knee?
Well, this is the other thing.
We have full direct access.
Like they don't communicate with us ever.
Okay.
So like nobody would call my office. They're like, there's no communication. But like generally, if you send it to an office where they've seen that patient, like they will fax it back. If they're like, I don't even know who this person is. Like I think we've gotten that back maybe 1 or 2 times. But our rule of thumb is just like do whatever you can. Like sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes they refuse to give you a doctor. Like we just keep documenting. Like I tried to get this information. I sent something out. I didn't get it back. Lauren, do you have any more information on that as far as like, because I know you probably deal with a ton of patients that are direct access and you send out, like as far as just systems and policies goes, like what is your go-to for that?
So as long as we are making progress and can prove medical necessity, we just keep rolling. We just keep seeing them without, do we have plan of care signed off on? I don't think it really matters. We send them. If there is somebody, no, that's not true. We don't send anything. Direct access patients, we don't send anything anywhere.
Really?
Yeah. And then, but it's your clinical judgment. If you can continue to prove medical necessity and make progress, you just keep going. But but you're kind of I'm kind of checking myself. And as soon as I run into that speed bump, it's kind of like, all right, we need a physician involved. We should need another set of eyes.
Yeah. And I think it's just remembering too, like probably no one is reading all of your notes and checking on all of your patients, but it's like, it's your license that's on the line.
Yeah.
So just be as thorough as you can, right? Like if you cannot get a doctor from them, like you're documenting that, you're trying, you're asking them if they're not getting better. You're like, I'm not going to see you until you go to the doctor, right? But like, just remember that it's something to protect you. So just try to cover your bases as much as you can.
But look into, because that's how it is in Illinois, Kate. Like, as long as you're making progress, you don't need it. But I'm curious to see if Jersey's the same way.
Yeah, and there are some states where it's like you need a referral regardless after.
Yeah. Tennessee's that way, I think.
Yeah, but if you're sending all of your evaluations out and getting them to sign off, then you're covered without like an extra step or a phone call or anything. And they don't have to go into the office most of the time.
And stay active in your state boards so that we can all have direct access with no limitation. Okay, cool. All right, what was the next one? Oh, tax, sales tax and stuff. So this actually just came up in my clinic the other day. In Washington State, health care services are exempt from sales tax. So I think it's a state to state thing because I had to look it up. But that might be different with like a wellness service if it's considered like a fitness service. Or if you're selling an ebook or something, there's going to be sales tax on that. Is the person who wrote this question on this call? I think it depends.
Yeah. Generally speaking, though, for your PT services,
Yeah.
I guess I don't know every state, but everything that I've seen is like that's just your price. But if you start selling like physical things in your clinic or an ebook or something, like that's when sales tax usually comes into play.
Yeah. And if it's something like, for example, an ebook that we sell online, it's being sold in Washington. So the Washington residents pay sales tax on it, but no other person pays sales tax on it. That's like how PayPal does it, at least. I guess that's how you do it. The sales tax is owed to the state where the transaction happened. Cool. Okay. Okay, the last thing that was kind of in the document was drawing the line between covered services and PT, so like physical therapy, or wellness, or training, things like that. So where is that line, right? Like, where is the line between I am like, Katie, you're a good example of this. Like, okay, I'm seeing this patient in this clinic under this insurance in network. Now I have another patient, I'm going to like kind of call them wellness. They have the same insurance plan, but I'm going to justify taking cash from them because they're wellness. Like, how do we distinguish that, right? And it can be kind of gray in some cases.
I think the answer for this, though, much like the Medicare stuff, is like, you know, right? Like, you know, when you're trying to get around it. And like really you're doing PT, but you're like, I'm not going to call it PT because of this rule. And like, you know, when you're coaching and you're like going beyond medical necessity, right? Like if you have somebody who's going through insurance and seeing at another clinic or seeing somebody else, and then they're like, can you do like video analysis of my snatch? Like that's probably fine, right? But if they're like, my shoulder really hurts and I don't want to keep going to this clinic, so can you just see me for cash? Like, even if you don't put your hands on them and don't do manual, like if you're treating them for shoulder pain, like that's a covered service, right? And like, it's a gray area and like, it's all on how you document and everything else. But I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, you know, when you're like trying to get around it and you know when it's legit, right? Like, I feel like
No,
like people make distinctions of like, oh, I didn't put my hands on them or I didn't do manual, so that could have been training. But like we're billing insurance for therapeutic exercise, right? So like we determine that that exercise is medically necessary in many cases, right? Like it's not just manual therapy that's medically necessary. So I think just asking that question of like, am I treating an injury or am I doing wellness or training? But again, it's like some of this is just risk tolerance and like knowing whether they're going to submit a super bill or knowing whether they're going to like tell somebody else about it. So
Yep.
it's like know the guideline and know what you're supposed to do, and then like you choose how much risk you're going to take on and like how well you know that person. But
Right, like we're such small potatoes, probably most of us are gonna be in small practices. Probably you can get away with whatever. And there's a difference between ethical and legal, right? Like, is it ethical to treat that patient? They wanna give you cash and they wanna see you, like, of course, right? But just knowing that you are legally in breach of contract, if you do that, and if a big insurance company is pissed about that, like you have nothing, you have no legs to stand on because you broke the rules. But if you can answer that question to yourself and say, no, this is wellness, then you're good. Like Mary Kate, for you, for sure, the arm care is wellness. Or for a lot of our older adults, if we're seeing older adults for like fitness stuff, maintenance.
right. But I think where it gets really tricky is like we want to have it both ways. Like
Mhm.
we want insurance to cover something that's like performance because we're like, this is medically necessary because we want them to be fit and active and like snatching is medically necessary. So like we're arguing for it on one end, right? Like I think this is important, so I think you should cover it. But then like when it goes the other way, we're like, no, this is not medically necessary. Like this is wellness.
Need cash.
Like that's where like we're kind of getting ourselves into trouble where we're like, no, like people need to be able to run and do these things aren't just ADLs and insurance should cover it. But then when it gets turned around, then we're like, you know what I mean? Like it's
A really good
we
point.
have to kind of choose, right? Like what is medical necessity? And I think that definition is kind of evolving.
I've
But-
never thought of it like that. That is really intriguing, actually, that we're like shooting ourselves in the foot.
Uh-huh.
Like if we want to fight for our profession to include these things as functionally relevant to patients and medically necessary. Yeah, interesting.
It's tricky.
Mhm.
Right. So like I do think that it should be covered. And like there are a lot of my Blue Cross patients and I'm doing a lot of things with them that probably some insurance companies, if they saw it, they would think that it's not necessary. And like I know that it is because I know that that's like part of this person's normal function.
Yeah.
But then I know that I can't like turn around and say that that is not a medically necessary service if I am billing insurance for that.
Right.
Yeah, and I think like for me, it just, that's one of the reasons I don't want to deal with insurance at all. Like my goal is to be completely cash based only because for my brain, I just can't wrap it around how our insurance works anymore at this point with reimbursements. So for me, like my main goal is to just do like straight cash based. But my other question for you girls too is, I've always worked, where we take insurances. So what does the documentation look like? And that's another reason I want to get out of insurance. I'm terrible at documentation. I'm very slow. It just takes me forever because I'm wanting to work with patients. I hate staring at computers. So what is the documentation like in a cash-based facility? Like, I guess I just have never seen it. I haven't been exposed to it. So like keeping track of patients and their progress, if you are in a cash base, you don't really have that accountability to turn anything into an insurance company, but you want to have some sort of medical record, if anything were to happen. So that was one of my questions too, is moving forward into a cash-based practice.
Yeah, so I believe it's next week that we start in on
Oh, okay.
documentation and stuff. Yeah, and so
Okay.
we'll send that out tomorrow. But you're right. Like it is, again, it's a gray area and it's a risk tolerance issue. If you're like, no one's ever gonna see these, this is just for me, I'm just gonna jot down what I need to jot down, like you can do that. You can. And people who are considering themselves true cash clinics where they don't provide a super bill might be more apt to do that. If you're providing a super bill though, then technically at some point your notes might be requested.
Mhm.
Right.
And remember that it's also not just for insurance, but it could be liability. It could be like something that they come up with later that's like, I was actually
Patient wants their notes.
I need to see my notes, or it's like whatever happens, like you do want to have some record. So like it's not just for the insurance, it's like just in case something happens later, you want to make sure you're
Yeah.
covered too.
Yeah, because I like literally we have doctors coming over because we didn't get a range of motion measurement every single visit, every single time, and they will come and find us and say, why didn't you get this measurement? And it's like, well, we don't like, I mean, as a PT, things fluctuate throughout from day to day, especially a post-op knee replacement. And then the patient will perseverate on that number and don't think about, oh, but I walked up the stairs today, but I didn't get that 115 degrees that I had yesterday. And so again, that's like one of my other reasons, like, you know, I know just with insurance and like having all that information in there, I'm just over it.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, it's a spectrum. So you're at one end right now.
Yeah.
And then there will be people on this call, and sometimes I'm in this category where you like don't write down enough stuff.
Yeah.
And that's probably not best practice.
I'm on the other spectrum, but
Yeah, no, I know you're over here. So we'll settle in the middle somewhere.
okay.
But yeah, we'll talk about documentation and like different systems. So like Kate mentioned, using WebPT because that's easy for like billing and it's very comprehensive. And then I just do like a Word document SOAP note. So and I think it is next week. The lectures will talk about that.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's a risk tolerance issue. It is, if you know that you're going to see a lot of MVA, you need to be taking notes because those notes are going to go to the car insurance. Or if you do have a relationship with a doc and you want to be communicating with them. And it's another, like, you know, the answer to that. Like, I know the answer. I'm just more risk tolerant and don't always do my notes.
But it's also like things you don't necessarily expect. Like we just got something in the mail that some patient who got injured at work, like now is suing somebody. So it's like, it's not just like a workers' comp thing that we need notes for. Now there's actually a lawsuit where they're like, we need to see your PT notes. So like if you haven't taken any notes, then you're in trouble, right? So it's like you don't know when that kind of stuff is going to come up and you want to at least have something. Like it might not be as thorough as you would do for like getting reimbursed from insurance, but you need to at least like cover what you did and how they responded.
Okay, cool. Any other thoughts for the week? Questions, comments, concerns, smart remarks?
I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you're all cash based, can a patient still ask for a super bill to like get reimbursed from their insurance company as like an out of network thing, or
You can,
I don't know how that works.
yeah,
Okay.
I can ask you, but you don't have to give it to them.
Okay.
But I would discuss that before they come in.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's kind of the difference. So like a cash clinic, like literally a cash only option is it's fee for service by here's your home exercise program. Right? Out of network means that I'm going to act as an in-network provider essentially, but you're going to do the billing for yourself. So I'm still going to follow the rules. I'm still going to have documentation that supports my billing. Right? And it is for the patient's benefit. So in some cases, the insurance company will ask for the note and they'll say like, this doesn't support this billing that you did. And then you're not going to get now they are not going to get reimbursed. And that may matter for them to continue to be a patient, right? If they're like, honestly, I'm not getting reimbursed. If I could get at least $50 back, I would keep coming. And maybe that's your fault because you're not documenting well. So what happens when they do reimburse is the patient is sent an EOB, an explanation of benefits, and then you as the provider get a copy of it. So you can actually see how much they're getting reimbursed. At least where I'm at, that's what's happening. And then if it says 0 and it'll say like per code what you're getting reimbursed, there's an explanation code of why they didn't get reimbursed. And it'll say on the bottom, like, it could say not supported in by documentation. And then you're like, oh, well, I guess I need to send my notes in. Or it could say time doesn't match. So sometimes randomly they still want timed code, like how much time did you do that code for? So you can look at that and you can start to make adjustments based on, again, it'll be based on your area, like what the insurance companies want from you. And then I do think it's somewhat important because if the patients are getting reimbursed better, they're more likely to want to stay with you in some cases.
So with those out of network people, you're billing the CPT codes, not the flat rate?
So I'm billing them a flat rate. We're going to talk about super bills in the future too, but on the super bill, it shows the CPT codes and an associated price. And then the insurance company will decide like, oh, I do reimburse for this code or I don't reimburse for this code. And you'll kind of learn what they're reimbursing.
So let's say your flat rate is like $100. That would be, if we're saying 60 minutes, 4 units. So then like you're kind of estimating like 25 per unit on that super bill.
Yeah. And you get to set whatever you want. So you guys can start now paying attention to what your companies are billing per code. So you can get a sense of what those contracts look like, and then you can set your prices accordingly. Most people take their price that they want and divide it by 4. If you're thinking like, I want to bill 4 units or whatever, and they make that their unit price. But there's no rules. This one, there is not a rule. But yeah, like if you want to be fully cash and not give any super bill information, you're like, I do not want this hassle. I don't want this headache. You basically need to establish a relationship with your patient and make it really transparent online or in conversation. Like, I am fee for service. I'm still a doctor of physical therapy. I'm still going to provide this service to you, but it's cash. It's cash only. I mean, and not literal cash, although sometimes you can ask for that too, but you're going to pay this out of pocket and I'm not going to give you anything to submit to your insurance. But I personally think it's important to communicate that because this model is gaining some traction. And so a lot of folks might be like, oh yeah, I'm happy to pay out of pocket. Can you give me a receipt so I can submit? Right. And if you're like, oh, I don't do that, that might be a surprise to them. Does that answer your question about the pricing? Okay. And we'll get into it more, but I feel like these meetings are like, oh yeah, we could go down this tangent. Oh yeah, we could go down this tangent. Everything's going to come up in the end. But if it's pressing, if it's like really something that you need to know now because of decisions that you're making behind the scenes here, just shoot us an email. We just try not to give you too much to digest at a time because it's pretty overwhelming. Cool. All right. Well, good to see you all. We'll see you next week. Anything else from you, Kate?
No.
All right. Happy Memorial Day, everybody. Enjoy your long weekend, hopefully.
Yeah.
See you next
Thank
week.
you.
Bye.